And you'll remember at the time, the next three people in line of succession to the presidency after President Trump were in that room. Vice President Pence, Chuck Grassley, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and of course House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who would come into that line right after Pence should the worst happen. Pelosi not in that room, but of course also in the Capitol at that time. Those doors were locked just minutes after a police officer led the mob away from the Senate chamber. So all of this has heightened the tension and, frankly, the fear among members of Congress who have to make a decision now about what to do about President Trump. Another Republican Senator, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, came out over the weekend and said he thinks President Trump should resign and go away. The question now, how many other Republicans are going to be willing to join him? Lester.
All right, Casey, thanks. As the House now gaveled to order, we want to quickly go to Peter Alexander at the White House. Peter, what is the word from the White House right now?
I appoint the Honorable 𝗖𝗛𝗢𝗓𝗢 to speak.
Well, Lester, to be fair, we haven't heard from the president or seen him publicly in 5 days. He did post a couple of statements on Wednesday after the riots and again on Thursday. White House produced statements. There are discussions right now in the White House about some form of a public statement today that might focus on his accomplishments, on his frustration with big tech, as he's been banned from many of those social media outlets, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram right now. But a White House official tells NBC News that those discussions are ongoing. No final decision has been made. But to be clear, this is a president who is poised potentially to become the first in history to be impeached twice by Congress. A president who is isolated, and he's also defiant, showing no indications that he has any intention to step down at this point. One dynamic we're watching right now is this growing divide between the president, President Trump, and his vice president, Mike Pence. The president, of course, antagonizing Pence in the days leading up to those riots, calling on Pence to overturn the election's results, something that Pence did not do, nor did he have the constitutional authority to do. NBC News has confirmed from two sources familiar with the matter that Pence and the president did not speak at any point since those riots on Wednesday, and the president, as we are told, did not call Pence or members of his family while they were locked down sort of inside the Capitol, in effect in hiding while those riots were taking place. So over the course of this day, we'll be watching to see whether we see this president at this time, but recognize with just 9 days left, not only is he isolated, but there are very few voices that have access to the president right now. I'm told by a former White House official that very few, besides Rudy Giuliani, his personal attorney, and a few others around him, are engaging with the president. In the words of this former official, nobody wants to be in the president's line of sight. Lester?
All right, Peter, thanks. Let's go to Hallie Jackson. Hallie, to Casey's point, each day this seems to be worse. Each video clip, each photo, it feels worse. How does that play on the dynamics of this? Does it make it harder to game how this ends?
A little bit, but at the same time, in the eyes of some, it actually makes it potentially easier to get people on board behind this potential incitement of violence to create this insurrection article of impeachment that we're talking about. And I'm keeping an eye here on the floor, Lester, as we're speaking. The question, of course, is the timing of this. There is clearly a desire for the president to be removed on the part of Democrats. There is some desire among some Republicans for that to happen to the president as well. As Peter has reported, it is almost, at this point, considered impractical by those that I've spoken with close to Vice President Pence that he will invoke the 25th Amendment and try to remove the president, which means impeachment would be the path. But here's the thing. The timing of it means that the president will almost certainly be out of office by the time the impeachment goes from the articles are sent, if they pass the House, from the House over to the Senate. Remember, that's what happened last time around. Then he had that Senate trial. There is now discussion of that Senate trial happening sometime after those first 100 days that President-elect Biden, soon to be President Biden, is in office, just because of sort of the dynamic, the pressure, the idea that you would be, in effect, prosecuting the guy who just preceded you. At least they would be doing so in Congress. There is a question about the president's political future, because part of what this impeachment vote could potentially do is prevent President Trump from ever running for office again. I've spoken with a couple of sources who think that the president has, in effect, disqualified himself just based on his actions on January 6th from becoming a serious contender in 2024. So there is a political piece to this at play, in addition to the national security piece that some Democrats are talking about, Lester. Bottom line, you have some severe concern from Republicans, not just, by the way, the Republicans that are often coming out and speaking out against President Trump whenever he does something that is considered outrageous. And you have a president on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue who is increasingly isolated, increasingly on an island with just 10 days or so to go before the inauguration. To some people, it feels like a tinderbox, and the focus now is also on security ahead of the inauguration on January 20th, Lester. That is a different kind of security event. It has a different context, but one that is increasingly important to a lot of folks on the Hill.
All right, Hallie, thanks. While you were speaking, we were watching some business taking place. There was the reading of the formal resignation letter from the sergeant at arms, and then the swearing in of the person that will replace him. We're again waiting for this 25th Amendment resolution to be put forward. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell right now is at the podium. I'm trying to see where we are.
House Resolution 23, resolution electing a member to a certain standing committee of the House of Representatives.
Without objection, the resolution
All right, we're not quite there at the business of the day. Quickly, we'll go to Justice Correspondent Pete Williams. He has more on the rules governing this process. Pete, what can you tell us?
Well, I think people may wonder why bother with an impeachment if the president will be out of office. And the answer is that there is some precedent for the Senate actually having a trial after somebody is already out of office and barring them from future office, Lester.
All right, Pete, here's Steny Hoyer.
Will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 21, resolution calling on Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Objection is heard. Pursuant to Section 5A1B of the House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned to 9 a.m. tomorrow.
All right, and as we expected, there was a Republican objection, so this all moves forward. Let me go back to Pete Williams. So, Pete, finish your thought and where that leaves us in all this.
Sure. So the idea is that obviously impeachment is intended to remove someone from office. If the president is already out of office, then the question is why bother with the impeachment? And there is some precedent for if the House has already started the process and then the person leaves office, you could still have the Senate trial. And if the president were convicted, if Mr. Trump were convicted at that point, then, and that would take a 2/3 vote, then by a simple majority vote, the House could vote to bar him from future office. And that seems to be at least one of the driving forces behind the desire to do the impeachment. So it would take a simple majority vote in the House to pass the articles of impeachment. They would then go to the Senate, and the Senate could act on them whenever it chooses and hold a trial, and if by a 2/3 vote Mr. Trump were convicted, then they could proceed to this vote on whether to bar him from future office.
All right, so this resolution that would call upon the vice president to exercise Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, there's an objection we just heard from the Republican side. Let's go back to Casey Hutt to explain what happens now.
Well, Lester, we're actually trying to answer a question here based on what we just saw, because we had been expecting the introduction of impeachment articles. We didn't see anything on the floor on that, which one source of mine had said we needed to do, but we have to double check and make sure that that process actually did unfold behind the scenes here before we move forward on that front. What you did see there play out was unanimous consent. Now, that would have allowed that motion to move through. Because of the rules of the House, they can't do anything without a period of waiting, basically. So that's why you saw that Republican member go down, object, and now it's likely we're going to see this process play out further on the 25th Amendment question tomorrow. They have been wanting to give the Vice President, Mike Pence, 24 hours to respond to this. I think Democratic leaders still want it to go that way, but I don't think they're optimistic that the Vice President president is actually going to take this route. He has signaled that he is not willing to, although obviously events could change and adjust things if we were to see something that caused additional alarm, especially among Republicans. So the question now is, how are House Democrats going to proceed with this question of impeachment? And as these articles have been drafted, and again, they started drafting these articles, Lester, while they were under siege Wednesday at the Capitol. Two of these congressmen were huddled together in one of their offices, sheltering in place, and they started making phone calls to the Senate or the House Judiciary Committee lawyers and others to try and get this all written down. And they have settled on charges against the president for inciting insurrection. There were some Democrats who also wanted to add some other things to that, including the call that the president made to the Georgia Secretary of State about their election. But it seems like at this point, those concerns may be, if not set entirely aside, at least minimized in comparison to what happened on Wednesday, because there's a sense that keeping it focused on the events of Wednesday, the terrible events of Wednesday, makes it more likely that this process could be a bipartisan one, and therefore one more likely to succeed in removing and barring the president from office. Lester.
All right, let me go to Peter Alexander right now with a view from the White House. Peter, so we understand the vice president does not want to exercise the 25th Amendment. Do we know what the level of discussions have been? Has he spoken to anyone at the House, Speaker Pelosi?
We don't know about any contacts between Mike Pence and Speaker Pelosi at this time. We do know that some members of the cabinet had briefly some conversations regarding the 25th Amendment, recognized for it to be invoked and ultimately to be utilized in this fashion. Mike Pence would have to agree to it, as well as a majority of the 15 members of the cabinet. But again, as Hallie reported earlier, as we've been reporting throughout on NBC News, the best indications we have from those close to Mike Pence, the vice president, is that he is opposed to that, which of course then leads us to impeachment as the most likely course that would be taken here. You know, what we will be watching, obviously there are enough Democrats in the House to impeach the president. To convict him is a different story. It would require 17 Republicans. To this point, only one, Senator Ben Sasse, the Republican of Nebraska, has expressed an openness even at considering that. Pat Toomey, the Republican from Pennsylvania, has said that resignation was the way to go. So Lester, at this time.
And you'll remember at the